for today, I'm going to talk you through what a continuous listening landscape actually is, but also why is listening important? What does it help you with? And then we're going to dive a bit deeper and have a look at what the key elements are to a listening landscape. And lastly, I'm going to share with you some listening landscapes that we designed for clients in the past to show you what it can look like in practice. So that's what we're going to do today. And I'm not going to tell you any longer. What does continuous listening mean? Well, in essence, it means that you have the means to get feedback on key topics within your organization at any time and from anyone. That you have the means to not only listen, but to also learn and act. And then the next question that you might ask is, why is listening important? Well, especially now it's very important, but also for what we foresee for the future, because the world is changing and your organization needs to change with it. From Harvard Business Review, we've learned, because they are predicting some things about the working world, is that in 20 years from now, 50% of all current jobs and tasks will be obsolete. They just won't be relevant anymore. 40% of all organizations will no longer exist in 10 years. And in 5 years from now, which is pretty near if I have to say so myself, 75% of the workforce will consist out of millennials. So that's a big change. And as an organization, you need to be ready for that change and you need to be agile. And if you're not currently, then you need to become agile. And one of the elements that are really crucial to that is fostering your human capital. Because engagement is something that came up in the previous webinars also, is very important to performance of an organization and to success. So we're going to have a slightly closer look at engagement, because engaged employees do really make a difference. And what we've seen from a variety of our studies, for instance, the Effectory Global Employee Engagement Index that we conduct every year or every other year, is that adaptability of people who are engaged is 30% higher than it is for employees who are not engaged or even actively disengaged. We see an increase in productivity of 21%. So the more engaged you are, the more work you actually deliver. And it might not be actual work as in production, but also in creative processes and what you add in value to a company in that way. In addition, what we see is that those engaged people are more likely to stay with your company. It's a difference of about 55%. So you can keep your high performers much longer if you listen to them and if you try and influence their engagement in a positive way. So which brings me back to the question, why is listening important? Let me start with a personal example, because I just mentioned that I'm a mom of 3 and I know that you're also a dad, Arjen. The one thing that babies do when they try to vocalize their need is crying. They do it a lot when they're young even. And what parents do and what they learn to do is to listen to their children very carefully. And by doing that, they are able to distinguish between cries to, is the child hungry? Is it cold? Maybe in pain, hopefully not, but you never know. And by listening very carefully and distinguishing, they're able to act accordingly. So they can, give it a bottle or feed it. They can give it a vest if it's cold, etc., which will make the crying stop and make for a happier baby. So that's an example of what listening can do to help you in your daily life. There's also, of course, a work practice that you can look at. A few years ago, I advised a chip company on their listening landscape. And they shared an anecdote with me. And you can imagine that when you're manufacturing chips, there comes a lot of complexity and technology into play. And they had machinery, and one of their technicians would go into the machine room every day and listen to the run of the machines. Is it the same rhythm? Are the vibrations okay? And by listening carefully, he was able to distinguish between slight changes. And when he noticed a change, he would also know that a malfunction was coming up. So imagine what productivity loss they would have had if he hadn't heard that and a malfunction would have actually happened. So listening carefully, learning from it and acting on it, even from an organizational perspective, gives you a lot of potential for more success. So that's what we're talking about today. And why is listening then important? Well, it helps you stay on top of things and remain successful as a company. It enables you to adapt to changing dynamics. Corona is one instance where a lot of dynamics changed and you needed to act on that pretty quickly. And it also helps you to connect with your employees. And that's very important because connection to your employees will influence their engagement. So when we're talking about continuous listening, what we see is that we want to enable you to use listening to your people to garner greater success. And it can be on any topic. It's a continuous loop. And it doesn't mean that you need to send out surveys on a daily basis, but it just means that you have access to do so where you need it, on the moments that matter. It could be onboarding. It could be a strategic pulse, for instance, on leadership. It could be a culture switch that you're going through, or you could also want your teams to look at their team dynamics themselves and act on it. So that's what we mean when we're talking about continuous listening. Let's have a closer look at the potential of listening from an organizational perspective. Every organization goes through specific phases, and whatever phase you are in, it doesn't really matter whether you're starting up, scaling up, whether you're already an established company, you are going through a culture switch or an external crisis, COVID again. It doesn't really matter where you are. There are certain goals that you try to reach, and the extent in which you reach your goals will determine your success. Now, what if we bring listening into the mix? You have an average chance of reaching success just by having a plan, aligning your people around that plan and enabling them. And if you bring listening into that mix as well, you open up a well of potential, to reach higher success on each level, whether that is a change or whether that is when you need a certain growth because you are a startup. And it's not just listening, it's also about the learning and the acting again. You hear something, you actually hear what your people are saying, and you stop and do something about it. So the potential that you will then gain will be much larger. It doesn't necessarily mean that you will reach a goal in the same way. You might reach it faster, but it might also be that you need to discard a certain goal because it's not relevant anymore. That's what listening can do for you. It can give you the insight to respond quickly and to enable your people. Some of the effects of listening that we've seen over the years, we conduct a lot of studies, like I said before, and what we see is that when you not only listen, but also learn from what people are saying and then act on it, you can see definite increases or positive declines in your figures. So what we've noticed is that when you listen and you do something about what people are saying to you, we see an increase of about 22% on average in engagement. And the engaged people are the ones that you want to have within your company because they signal success. The same goes for efficiency. When you really listen to the problems that your people are facing, which bottlenecks are they experiencing in running their team or their organization or their processes, if you really listen and do something about it, you can see an increase in efficiency of about 29%. And this is an average, so for some companies it's even larger. At the same time, what we've seen is that if you know what drives your engaged people and you work on that, and you also communicate about that, and you connect with them on that topic, then we see an 80% decrease in turnover. So the people you want to keep will stay with you for a longer period of time. Also, what we've noticed is that when people are listened to, and they also have responsibility and the opportunity to do changes themselves, they are much more prone to deliver quality in work. So we've seen a reduction of 15% in errors from the perspective of the employee. And that also does something with your engagement, you become much prouder of the work that you do. So all in all, the effects of listening are very noticeable. And now we're going to touch upon your question, the potential of listening from an employee perspective. No matter where they are in their life cycle within your company, if you have the means to ask them how they're doing, it will help you engage them even more. So whatever length of employment you have with a company, as an employee, you go through a specific pattern of engagement. We see the same pattern roughly occurring every time. So it doesn't matter if you're there 6 months or if you have worked somewhere for about 20 years, we still see a grow, a stable phase, and often a decline. But the path is not very smooth. It can be rough in places. And what can really help you to increase the value that you get from your employees, and what can help you to bring the engagement up, is asking the right questions at the right moment in time. So for instance, what if you would ask your onboarding people if their onboarding was successful? What they need, if they got everything they need, and you apply that information for new arrivals coming after them so that you get them up to speed much faster than you would before. It helps you get them engaged, their engagement to a higher level much sooner. So you get more value from them. And during the rest of their life cycle, whenever you're going through a change, you as an organization, for instance, someone switches jobs, or within the company, I have to say, or there is a team change, new personnel added, keep tabs on your employees. What are they experiencing? What are their ideas for improvement? And get to know what influences them for a better or higher performance. And the same rule applies later on. If you keep them more engaged, they will also stay with your company for a longer period of time. So you're really able to bank on the high performers in your organization. There's also, of course, offboarding that comes into play, because what we've noticed in offboarding surveys is that 45% of respondents have mentioned that their leave could have been prevented by the organization. If you know that, and you know what could have, helped them to stay, then you can apply that to the current employee workforce, and you can help them reduce turnover in that way. So let's have a look at the key elements of a listening landscape, because we've talked about what it is, we've talked about the why is it important, but how do you build up a listening landscape? Well, there are several elements that are really important. The first one is continuous access. I said before, it doesn't equal continuous listening in the sense that you send out daily surveys. No, that's not the case. What we mean is that you as a company and the people within your company can have continuous access to listen when it's needed on the topic that is relevant to them at that moment in time. So that's the second element that comes into play. And the third one is feedback maturity. When we design a landscape, we always take into account what the feedback maturity of a company is. And you might ask yourself, what is feedback maturity? Well, it's the capability you have to learn from and act on feedback, because technology can help you a lot. We use technology on a daily basis to help people send out surveys, ask questions, even ask the right questions, to be able to learn from that by analyzing the results. We can give them help, we can help them prioritize, and we even have a set of tips and best practices available for many situations that can occur. But what it doesn't help with technology is the willingness that people have, or the capabilities that a person might have to actually do something about it, so to act on the feedback. So technology is an enormous enabler, but you also need to be feedback mature in the sense that you have both the experience, the priority, and the resources in-house to do something with the feedback. And I'll touch upon that later again when we show the landscape. So what does a listening landscape look like? Well, like we said, 3 important elements: access, relevance, and relevancy, and maturity. And we have 3 levels when we try and build up a landscape for you as an organization. And I wanted to mention that before, because it's not just HR that sends out surveys, and it's not just the leadership that has an information need. It can also be on a local level. It could be if you operate in different countries, that the countries themselves are experiencing different things and want to have the flexibility to ask for feedback on the topics that matter to them. So that's what we're doing when we're building up a landscape. So I'm going to walk you through 2 examples. The first one is a listening landscape of a scale-up with about 100 employees. We helped them out with a listening landscape in 2019 for the first time. They were growing very much. And they had a big need to align all the people to the same goal, but to also ask that repeatedly, because they needed to respond quickly to any changes that they saw either in the market or in their product. So we set up alignment pulses for them, and they were able to do them themselves. You know, very short surveys, shorter intervals. I think they asked them about every 3 months. And I got a lot of feedback on the course that they were taking and whether or not the people were on board and whether or not they needed to make changes. Well, from that first year, what they learned is we are growing. And it also means that our company is growing and teams become larger. So a new factor came into play for them. They really needed to give their teams the opportunity to build and become stronger and to work better together. So they opened up the option for team pulses. And the teams had the freedom to ask their people on topics that were relevant to them, like, for instance, role clarity or the workload that they were experiencing. And what we saw afterwards is that new people within the company actually had no idea. So from those team pulses, we found that new arrivals in the company had a lot of trouble getting up to speed because everyone was working so hard in reaching the goals that they did not step back and take the time to really bring new ones along. And that's when they started an onboarding survey as well, to gather that information and to really know, okay, what do we need to do and what program do we need to set into place to help our new people come up to speed as well. In their second year, they continued with the alignment pulses. They did one in February, and pretty soon afterwards, Corona happened worldwide. So in addition, we helped them out with some COVID check-ins to really stay in touch with their people. Even though it's not that big of an organization, it is still pretty difficult in a situation like that to stay connected with your people. So they used the COVID pulse to really stay connected and to hear what their people were going through and also what they could anticipate for the future. What 2021 will bring, we don't know yet, because we designed the landscape based on what they're experiencing at that moment in time. But the good thing to remember is, because it's a continuous loop, they can change it up every year. Whatever they need, they can get it. And now we get a more difficult one. This is a listening landscape for an organization of more than 5,000 employees. Well, I should actually say it's 2 organizations from the get-go, because when they started with their listening landscape, they had a very strategic goal in mind, because they were anticipating a merger between 2 organizations. And they wanted the merger to be as successful as possible. So what they did is they created a baseline survey for both organizations so that they kind of knew, okay, this is the status currently. And next year, we want to see a change. So after the baseline, they got a good idea on the engagement of their people, the way they worked, where the differences were between the 2 organizations. And during the first phases of the merger, they had merger pulses in place to really stay in touch about, do you know what the merger is for? Do you know what we're trying to accomplish? Do you know what you can do to help us out in this change? And what they noticed is, because of the merger, logically, some of the jobs became obsolete. And they implemented an exit survey as well, because they really wanted to learn from the experience of those people to help their organization change more quickly. And at the same time, they wanted to give their offboarders the feeling, you matter to us. And if we can help you afterwards, we will also do that. And the offboarding survey helped them to do that. For their second year in 2019, they continued with the baseline and they were able to compare to the previous year. They continued with the merger and change pulses, but they also added some team pulses. What they noticed from the baseline is that engagement was dropping a bit. So they really wanted to dive deep in the specific teams to get to grips with what's the reason for this drop. They first attributed it only to the merger and change, but they weren't really sure what it was. So they did some team pulses, and they did it on a local level, but in this case it was on a country level. So it's not as low as just one single team, but they got a good image of what in each country was going on. And from that, they noticed that there was a loss of culture and identity due to the merger. So people really didn't know kind of company am I now working for? It's a bit of that, or it's a bit of this. And they found out that they needed to establish a new culture and to communicate that also very broadly so that people knew what they were a part of. You know, you really want to engage your people. So they implemented a culture pulse on a central level. And from the culture pulse, they also decided we're going to take every new person coming in along on this culture journey. So they implemented the onboarding at the same time. And then 2020, again, it's going to become a bit repetitive, but COVID happened. So where they wanted to continue with the culture and identity, they got a new factor weighing in that made it more difficult for them to establish their culture. So they used the COVID pulse as well. And what they found is that they really needed the teams to be more connected, and they used the team pulses to offer them that opportunity. And what they're now doing as we speak is a recovery pulse, because they wanted to learn from the wisdom of to learn from their users, you know, use the wisdom of the crowd to know, what if this happens again in the fall? What do we need to do then? Or what do we need to do differently? It also helped them gather ideas for, you know, if the world is changing, does it mean that our organization needs to change as well? And do we see new opportunities, or do we see things that we need to drop? So that's what they're going through at this moment, and they're learning as we speak. So we'll see what 2021 will bring for them.